So having focused first on the history and what we learned from the history of the Bureau, we want to move now to our second panel, which is going to be looking forward into what is the future vision for research and for the Bureau. Our panel then has active researchers from different sectors, different departments in the college, and each of them are working on large-scale projects and initiatives that are going to be opening up new opportunities in the next 10 to 20 years. We didn't do the calculation of years of experience in the college. I don't know what we would probably be. I don't know. It'll be less than 156. I'm going to introduce each of them briefly. So Rob Lindgren is an associate professor in the Department of Curriculum and Instruction. He was recruited to the college in 2013 as part of strategic, I think it's hiring, but it says firing.
Let me check my email. Oh yeah.
Strategic hiring cohort organised by FUAD, as we've heard, to build the Delta programme, the digital environments for teaching, for learning, teaching and agency. He's worked closely with the Bureau to write a proposal for the 2017 Campus Investment for Growth competition, which funded the new Technology Innovation in Educational Research and Design, or TIRED, a community of interdisciplinary researchers and designers who are developing cutting-edge applications of new technologies to address critical issues in education and learning. Megan Burke is an associate professor in special education. She's worked to develop and test advocacy training programs to educate and empower parents of individuals with disabilities to access services not only for their own offspring but also for other families. Luc Paquette has a PhD in computer science. He came to the Department of Curriculum and Instruction in 2015. He currently serves as the principal investigator of our Illinois Secondary Teacher Education and Computer Science Initiative, or ISEX, which is the second Campus Investing for Growth funded project that we have in the college, which was funded in 2018. Last but not least, Rodney Hobson came to Illinois just 1 year ago from George Mason University. He was recruited here through the President's Distinguished Faculty Hiring Program. At George Mason, he served as the Associate Dean for Research and Human Development in the College of Education there. And here at Illinois, he's a professor of evaluation in the Department of Educational Psychology, and this year is serving as the Dean's Fellow. So, I imagine in the future panelists have been asked to give us their thoughts on what they see as the current big opportunities in educational research, particularly as they relate to urgent current societal challenges and what is needed to take on these challenges, and how the Bureau should be part of that. So I'd like to invite our panel to give an opening commentary before we move to interactive questions. And so Megan, you want to try the microphone?
Is it okay? No? Yeah? Really? Okay. So my research, as Gabrielle mentioned, looks at how to develop and test advocacy training interventions for parents of young adults with autism. Right now we're running a multi-site randomized controlled trial funded through an R01 from the National Institute of Mental Health, looking at how do we improve access to services among parents of young adults with autism, which should subsequently improve employment, health, well-being, and quality of life, not only for the individual, but also for the family. So kind of in the context of thinking about that project and thinking about current and future directions, what we've been thinking a lot about is responsiveness and sustainability. So the idea of being responsive to the needs of all families and thinking about how are we reaching out to culturally and linguistically diverse families with intervention, how are we making sure that it's working for all families and not just for a subset of families and their loved ones, but also in the context of disability, thinking about how are we making sure, now is it working still? Okay, it seems to like go in and out. Yeah, okay, it's not just, okay. In the context of disability, thinking about the extent of support needs. Okay. Yes. Yeah, it's a battery. Oh, okay. So in terms of autism, thinking about how can we make sure these interventions are working not just for our youth with autism who do not have comorbid intellectual disabilities, but how are these interventions working across the spectrum of functioning? And making sure that we're designing interventions that are working for all students with autism and not just a subset of them. And then with that, thinking about sustainability. And I think this is really important for all grants that we're looking at. This is a 5-year grant, so it's a nice long one. But making sure that the intervention that we've developed at the conclusion of the grant is going to be sustained after it has ended. and thinking about how are we going to have community involvement and community partners who will go ahead and carry it on so that it's not something that just dies at the end of the grant period. And to that extent, we're working closely with the Autism Project, which is a state-funded grant that we have here that serves 16,000 families of youth with autism every year. And they've agreed to kind of carry on that project and the intervention after the grant has concluded. So I think thinking about both of those things, responsiveness and sustainability, are some of the big issues in educational research. And those are just some of the ways in the context of that project how we're trying to address that.
Hi everyone. So I want to talk a little bit about, I want to answer the question that was posed to us about grand challenges and trends in educational research by way of speaking a little bit about the how tier ed came to be. So the first thing to say is that you heard in the previous session Fouad talking about the Learning Sciences Design Initiative. Which in a lot of ways is a very similar initiative to tier ed. In fact, we took a lot of the infrastructure that was already there. Tier ed is kind of V2 of that initiative, but we were able to, even after Fouad left, we were able to continue to garner support across campus for this initiative, and we got some new money to go with it. And when you get new money with something, you have to change its name. So now it is tier ed, but I do want to acknowledge that a lot of where tier ed came from started with what Fouad was talking about earlier about developing interdisciplinary capacity. And so I think both of those initiatives really came out of kind of three sort of building forces with not just within this college but on this campus and forces that the Bureau has played a role in across the board and consistency. So I think the first force is this kind of slow realization that there was a lot of stuff happening on campus, a lot of really exciting projects, a lot of really exciting people and initiatives, that when you really sort of took a step back and looked at it, looked a lot like educational technology research, the kinds of things that in some ways we would like to be emulating or at least be part of here in the College of Education. So you've got we were finding out about anthropology faculty members here on this campus who are using VR to train people about how to deal with researching sites. We were finding out about iSchool faculty who cared about digital literacy and how people were taking advantage of museums and libraries to educate themselves and to develop those skills around digital literacy. We were finding out about CS professors here who were not only developing cutting-edge algorithms, but we're also interested in how just like normal people understood those algorithms, like when it came to how they were used to control their social media feeds. So this was a ton of exciting stuff, and it was starting to feel from myself and from people in the Bureau that we really needed to be part of this, we needed to harness it, and we needed to figure out a way that education, at least at some level, could lead on some of these initiatives. The second force was the observation that a lot, when Emma and Dan Hoffman and I first arrived here, we were stumbling upon ways to get our work done, but it was very sort of happenstance and kind of random sort of interactions. And so, you'd end up having coffee with one professor and realize, oh my gosh, they've developed this tool that is, so useful for so many things, but they didn't even necessarily have a great application for it. And all of a sudden we're like, well, I have a good application for it. Let's use it here in education. My own personal example of this is that I was really, excited to do simulation work that involved the use of body interactions with science simulation. So I was looking for somebody who could help sort of support how do we get the body more involved. And I was kind of hopping from different departments on campus, talking to people, and I ended up talking with Guy Garnett, who's actually a music professor, who had been developing these algorithms and working on problems of how do you make inferences about sound using all these great machine learning types of tools that we have. And we got to talking a little bit, and it turns out it's not actually all that different to apply those algorithms to camera feeds of body movement. And so that then turned into an NSF-funded project where we're looking at how body movement could be inferred from science education simulations so that people felt like they were part of these experiences. The third force is, and I think this is a really important one, is that over the 15 or so years that I've been doing educational research, I feel like there's been the slow progression, the slow realization to recognizing design as a legitimate scholarly practice. And I know a lot of people, a lot of the new hires that we brought in really sort of embody this belief and this spirit. And so what you're starting to see, and again I praise the Bureau for really getting behind these initiatives, is you're starting to see more and more work that isn't just, let's do a randomized control trial on this thing that already exists out there, but let's build something. Let's make something that people can interact with and then see what happens. Not with any expectations that it's going to solve all of our educational dilemmas, but that it's something that we can tinker with and that we can test. And this has been a real driving force, not only in terms of our own work, but also driving us to now have collaborations with people all over the campus who have expertise in design. Design is no longer, we just have to look across the street to realize that design is no longer relegated just to FAA. It's in engineering, it's in media, it's in all different aspects of this university, and we definitely need to be players with this. And in many ways we already are. And so it's really with the help of the Bureau, recognizing these trends and supporting us. We were able to get a number of new, really fantastic hires over the past a couple of years who, as I said, really embody this vision. But I guess if I was to succinctly answer the question, where do we see research, educational research going? I think the obvious answer is to say that it's going to be interdisciplinary. But that in itself should underwhelm you as a statement. Although, it's true, but the question now becomes how. How is it that we are going to support interdisciplinary research? Because frankly, there are a lot of really bad models of how this happens, right? You can sometimes have, scientists doing, all this work and then deciding, well, it'd be good to share this with some people, and then, well, I better call up, somebody I know who knows somebody in education who can help me to disseminate that. You can also have situations where you've got an education person who's got a great idea, and then it's like, let's get a programmer from computer science to implement that idea, and it becomes kind of a consulting thing. You really need shared intellectual investment on these sorts of projects for them to be successful. And so I'll end by saying that I think the Bureau's role needs to really help us to provide us with models, to have a sense of what else is happening on campus, to sniff out these productive interdisciplinary collaborations with other units to support that kind of work, because it makes us all better, it brings us all into the future, and hopefully some of these problems get solved.
Thank you, Rob. I'll try to follow up that. We'll see what happens. So I want to talk, for my introductory statement, I want to talk a little bit kind of to my two different roles that I see as myself having in the college and on this panel. So one of them is I'm PI of the ISTEX initiative, as Gabrielle mentioned, where we're working towards computer science education. Mostly right now we're focusing in iSchool, but eventually that could expand. And then in terms of my research, which you've heard people talk about, machine learning and AI and big data. So my research in the field of educational data mining and machine learning, and kind of where I see some opportunities to go forward in the futures. So in terms of CS education, Jim talked about it a little bit earlier today, but in terms of if we see CS education as being something important, something that we think we want students to experience in high school, in K-12. And I think people are starting to feel like this is more and more important, as illustrated by the success of the CS Education Illinois Summit last week. And I'm going to do a shout out to Rhea, because it wouldn't happen if she hadn't put all the efforts for that. Where we had 200 people, we had the NCSA auditorium was full, standing room for the keynote. I think people are seeing this is important. This is something that needs to be pushed forward. There's been some great progress in terms of CPS making computer science a requirement in their high school for their graduating classes, but this is, right now, this is not a large scale, like how do we expand that beyond just CPS? And in terms of, the rural areas where it might be more difficult to train people to get classes, making sure that women are represented in computer science, that minority are represented in computer science. And so that opens up a lot of challenges about how do we do this the right way? And I don't have the answers yet. Hopefully we're going to find them, but what are the research questions that could help us make this, help us do this the right way, right? In terms of access, some people mention online education, distance education. How do we teach computer science to people that are in those more distant regions that might not be able to drive to Champaign every week to take classes to get trained as computer science teacher? So I think that's something that's going to be very important. Let's see. Some people mentioned in terms of kind of the human side as well of like digital technology and how people consume digital media now. And then if we think about would teaching students about computer science, would that help them be more kind of more informed consumer of digital media? And might that help in terms of answering some of the big questions that we had earlier? So that's one aspect. The other aspect is more in terms of my research in AI, machine learning, learning analytics, big data. You've probably heard the buzzwords. And I think there's been a lot of great progress. We're doing a lot of great work in that area, but it's still fairly limited. And I think there's some challenges that come up of how do we take what we're doing in those small environments, very limited, and we say, oh, we're getting good success, but how do we scale those up? And I think there's a technological issue in terms of building algorithms that are going to scale up, that are not going to stop working once we take them out of the lab. I think that's something people don't pay enough attention to. I think there's some big issues in terms of privacy and ethics with big data in education. Some of that data is very sensitive. How do you handle student data in a way that's going to benefit students, that's going to benefit teacher, but that's not going to be disrespectful toward the students? And this is something that I also feel we're not addressing enough. There's some issues around fairness. So you might have heard in other fields that use machine learning, they're starting to see that the models they're building, they're not exactly fair, right? And one of the most obvious ones is in facial detection, right? Where it works very well on white people, it might not work as well on other people. When you train them to work on other people, then they do much better, but the people who are building them didn't think about testing them. That's one way, but there's a more insidious way as well where it kind of comes in. If you think about people that are working in terms of building models to do like sentencing, and then the idea being that, well, judges can be biased, so we're just going to use an algorithm to decide on sentencing, and then because it's data-driven, it's not going to be biased, but the data that's being used to train those models is biased. And so you end up with a model that's being biased, but you think it's fair because it's data-driven. And I think there's a lot of potential to face those same issues in education, and I feel like we're not paying attention to this as much. And then finally, I think it's important to keep in mind that the goal of data science, big data, and education is to support education, and not to do data science for the sake of data science. And that brings me to kind of bridging those two topics in terms of there's a growing interest from people in computer science to do work related to education, whether it's teaching computer science or using those machine learning AI approach in the context of education. And there's some interest in the people in education to look at how we teach computer science and how we use those approaches. But I feel like we're still seeing mostly people that come from one field that is trying to bridge to the other side. I think one of the things that's happening with Delta or with like CS plus X program or hopefully the ISTAX initiative is we're starting to build programs where people are trained in both disciplines at the same time. And I'm really looking forward to see what is going to be the impact of having people where they're trained to thinking about those two disciplines in working together rather than having training in one and trying to bridge to the other side.
Great. Good morning. It's great to be here. Thanks so much for the invite. And yeah, I'm also relatively new here. It's not my first time around this rodeo though, but it's certainly, I'm new here in Illinois. In fact, I'll just say in terms of background, I was trained in the Bureau of Education Research at the Curry School of Education at the University of Virginia. So having a bureau in my own academic upbringing is not unusual. Don Ball, Mary Catherine Elwine, Belinda Lloyd, Brenda Lloyd, Bruce Gansneeder, Bob Covert, Mike Caldwell, people who facilitated kind of early academic training through a Bureau of Education Research, where I was a PhD student, master's student in educational evaluation, situated in a bureau where we're learning and applying, while learning methods and tools, and at least tools that I thought I needed then to answer those kinds of questions in an applied space. So part of our evaluation training in this bureau was both classroom and in the field, and so that's how I cut. That's how my cloth is cut in terms of thinking about a bureau. There's more to that story because part of the training in the Bureau in the Curry School of Education meant more interdisciplinary training, so that's one of my words as well. I don't think it's a nuanced word. I don't think it's a word that we're discovering or a word that my mentors didn't already have in their own eclectic academic background. I think we're using it now in another way, but I think part of the reality is that interdisciplinariness has sort of been here for a while. Our questions have changed, and I was inspired not only by those mentors in the Bureau, at least in the first couple of decades of my academic work. I'm in beginning my third decade of teaching at the university level, and I do rely on the Bureau to kind of shape and serve as a catalyst for my own academic training. And I think the same thing, if I have to fast forward 22 years later, that this would be the same. That even as a student of educational research, that a Bureau would serve in a role to catalyze, to bring connections between us across disciplines and spaces. And so I'm quite comfortable with a Bureau model like that. Because then, at least, I thought the questions I was asking in the Curry School, in the Bureau, I thought they were novel then, but they stayed with me because part of what I learned that I couldn't get all my answers in the Bureau in the Curry School, and so it did mean going across the bridge at the Curry School of Education. If those of you who have been there know that there was a bridge that separates us from the education school to the larger arts and sciences, and so not many of us in education got across the bridge. It was metaphorical, but it was real. It was physical. And so I did. I ventured out. My questions were answered in anthropology and linguistics and philosophy by Del Hines, by Richard Rorty, and others. And so I had feasted on that stuff. But I also knew not only did not many of us get across the bridge, the questions I was raising about what is education and schooling and who is it for, we were not all asking. And so I'm going to add another topic or grand challenge or another issue regarding, I don't even think it's broadening participation, quite frankly. I think that's sort of NSF's word at the moment. But I think there's some other ways that we should probably push that broadening participation to address systemic inequalities and equities. That's not in the dialogue necessarily around race, gender, geography, and other issues related to justice. And so I think I've certainly I take the challenge that Dick Anderson raised regarding, did you discover, I think he asked, anything important to change your field this morning? And I think that's, for me, the beginning of the third decade and being at Illinois gives me some comfort to think that I can help to try to answer that question. There are people around here that can contribute to thinking about those things. And I'm already in a space, an evaluation that had a history, Circe and others, and played between the Cronbachs and the Stakes and the Hauks, where I've read those things and I've seen those people in their roles, and not met physically, but seen them in their work, and have seen the implication, their influence on other mentors who actually have been through Illinois. And so Illinois serves as at least in the evaluation field, as a hub, a traditional archival hub for scholars in evaluation and evaluation research for 50 plus years. And but the story sort of isn't in there because while the Bureau helped to shape my identity, the Bureau is no more. And so bureaus die. And so they evolve. I'm not suggesting that we should have a quiet death here. I just suggest that part of the reality of bureaus is that they change, they evolve. New ideas emerge, new spaces and infrastructures emerge, but thankfully this bureau is here. And kind of thinking about the evolving nature of the bureau is that, if we could live the centennial, I mean, I think I've certainly learned a lot just listening to 20 or 30 minutes of colleagues. But there's a torch and a baton to pass, and I hope we can talk about some of the things further. I know that's the plan in this panel, and so I look forward to what the evolving nature of the Bureau might become as well.
So we have let's thank the panel for the So now I have some questions that I'm ready to ask, and it's great to have an opportunity to have you captive people up here that have to answer my questions. But before I start on mine, let's also want to make it open to questions from the floor. So are there any questions immediately that people would like to ask? I'm going to bring the microphone over to you. So. Should I stand?
Well, I'll stand until you guys can see me. Hi. So my question is really to everyone on the panel. I know some people probably have a little bit more to say than others, but it is a general question. My question is, how does intersectionality play a role of creating new technologies under education, and how assessing those technologies play into making sure that we maintain those connections between education and technology through the lens of social justice within education?
Thank you. Would like to take this?
That was a finger word. That's much. If we had that one before, then we would have. But that's one that we sort of need to chew on. No. I mean, I thank you for the question. I just someone didn't just say that's a meaty question, and one we need to chew on a bit. What I heard was intersectionality, new technologies, social justice, and research. And so let me just an assessment. Add another one. Actually,
Music.
did you say computational linguistics?
I said country music.
Okay, we might have fun up here. I think the first thing that comes to mind for me is Audre Lorde. I mean, how odd is that? I mean, but the point is, for those students of Audre Lorde in the room and Black feminism, she made a provocative statement 30 years ago that said something like, "We will not use our master's tool to dismantle the master's house," to a group of humanitarians and humanists that prevented her both physical and academic space to enter a set of conversations. That's the first thing I think about. And so that's I don't know what you had for breakfast, but that sort of gets the things moving if you want to talk about some things like that. And that sort of reminds us how far we are from, if we go further into that, because let me just riff on one piece and then you all can riff on the rest of the things like country music and things. But on the intersectionality piece, it just so happened to be a topic of the last two, the one previous and the one coming of the Center for Culturally Responsive Evaluation and Assessment conferences that runs. Flashing is one of the former Associate Deans for Research and current Director of CREA, Stafford Hood. And so he's built this center that facilitates the study and community of practice and exchange of thinking about issues of culture and evaluation and assessment. And that intersectionality, what has been a theme over the last two conferences of 400 participants coming from around the world and come to Chicago, is significant because there's enough ire, I would say, and disgust for the way that work is being done in communities of color. And so that ire, I think, is being translated to thinking about what should be these tools that we have that can be used and borrowed to both dismantle or not dismantle or raise questions this master's house, because part of at least the metaphor or imagery of the master's house is sort of ominous, right? And it presents that, like I would have probably loved to be in the room actually years ago when people were throwing things at Whitehurst here in the college. I mean, that sounds like dismantling the master's house. That means raising some critical questions that, wait, you're not going to bring that up in here around these communities that have been struggling with these issues for a long time. So, yeah, so I'll just start there and then maybe my colleagues will add.
Apparently, I'm the colleague here. You can think about it while I try to make up an answer. Yeah, so I don't think I can answer fully your complete question. But one thing I do want to talk about is I think, like looking at my own experience, what happened with me in terms of being exposed to computer science at a young age. I was very privileged, I think, in that regards. And I know not everyone has access to that. And if you look at the statistics, you'll see that it's very skewed in terms of who gets access to that. And so one of the things that we're hoping to work towards with the ISTEX initiative is kind of broadening participation in computer science, not because we think everyone will want to do computer science in the future, but for everyone to get a sense of what it is and be able to decide, is this something that you could see yourself do in the future? And is there something that you can identify with? Because I think the way computer science is being taught right now, if you look at Introduction to Computer Science class, sometimes I feel like if you're not already interested in computer science, you're not going to be interested by the end of the class, right? How do we make computer science accessible, not just in terms of putting it in the school, but also making sure that everyone can see themselves as doing computer science, can experience it for themselves? There's a very good book that I'm hoping I'm remembering the name right, but it's something like Into the Deep End or something like that. Which talks about case study of schools in California where there is computer science course, or where they pretend there's computer science course, and looking at who gets access to those courses. And just because a course is available, you can see it's still very skewed. There's kind of gatekeepers in terms of who has access to those courses. And so one thing we're kind of thinking about and trying to work forward with ISTEX is kind of making access easier, breaking those barriers. And what I'm hoping is that might be overly optimistic for me, but that, you know, college is not the time for people to start getting interested in a topic like that. It's too late once they get to college. So you could make things accessible in college, but you're not going to have the same reach than if you start earlier in their schooling. So if you do something like what CPS is doing, where everyone has to take a computer science course, and you design a computer science course in a way that is going to grab attention, is going to grab interest, that doesn't expect someone to come into the class and already know computer science before taking their first computer science course, that this is going to have long-lasting impacts in terms of who does computer science. And then that's going to translate to who creates computer program, and then that's going to have an impact because the programs are more likely to be designed in a more inclusive way. It's going to have an impact on who does research related to issues related to computer science, and then hopefully that's going to lead to more inclusive, to the technology being developed being more inclusive. I feel like I've diverged from your initial question. I hope it kind of answers, and now I'm going to pass it on to Rob.
Thank you for your question, Sean. I love that you're a few weeks into your grad program and you're already making us work. Much appreciated. So I think that there's, and I'm going to do similar to Luke, I'm going to kind of bend your question a little bit to something that I feel like I can answer in a meaningful way. So I think in thinking about how technology can potentially address social justice, equity, and I'll add broadening participation to that too. I think, I always try to take a very humble approach to answering those questions, because I think sometimes people, maybe it's out of defensiveness or what, they sort of leap to say, yes, new technologies can answer all those problems, and I absolutely don't think that they do. But I also don't think we should be retreating. I don't think it's, and I've evolved on this issue. I think early on I was very quick to say, I don't do that kind of research. I do technology research, but that's not fair and that's not brave. And so I think we have to keep working to find ways that those developing technologies that lead to all the good things we want in education continues to do that, but it's also doing it in a way that certainly doesn't undercut and hopefully helps to enhance our understanding and our progress on those other issues that you mentioned. For me, what I've been thinking a lot about in terms of what all different types of technologies do, and I think this dovetails a little bit with what Luke is saying, is the idea of positioning or positionality, and just how powerful technology can be in terms of framing a learner's interaction with some learning content, whether that be science or in the humanities, whatever it is, that you can suddenly broaden the space of interaction with content so that I'm not necessarily positioned as a recipient of this knowledge, but I could be positioned even as a learner as somebody who owns this knowledge. I'm part of this conversation. And everything I continue to hear about all the equity and the social justice issues that we have often intersects with these issues of identity that are developing so early. This idea that that I can't be an engineer. Why would I be an engineer? Why would I be a professor? Because I don't sort of see myself reflected in those fields. And I think there's so many interesting and exciting things that can be done in virtual environments, using data, even very simple, just sort of reframings of the things that you do in schools and out of schools that can lead people to have a different kind of interaction that puts them in a different position, a different stance with regard to the thing it is that they're trying to learn about and understand. And if that can be empowering, and if it can be especially empowering to our underserved and underrepresented students in the education system, then we need to put everything we have into figuring out what those things are. The limitations is that, and I feel this deeply in my work all the time, is that I can come up with something that I think is going to be really powerful and really transformative over a period of maybe 20 minutes. And it's sometimes difficult to get the resources, to get the buy-in, to be able to do the long-term interventions, to actually do something like, to monitor somebody's identity development, to see whether or not these kinds of experiences that we think will be helpful actually do those things. So that's a place where I think the intersection, not the intersectionality you were talking about, but the intersection of technology research and addressing those really important social needs can potentially come together.
You're a doctoral student?
No, master's first year.
Oh my god. You should be a doctoral student. Yeah, good. Intersectionality is very critical, especially among individuals with disabilities and their families, right? Because we're talking about usually multiple minoritizing identities. You have a disability, usually you're a person of color from a family of color, and usually we're talking about women. When we're thinking about moms, we're talking about women, so race, gender, disability. And then disability is usually also endemic to poverty, right? You have a disability, which is very costly, so you're more likely to have less financial resources. When you have less financial resources, you have less access to healthcare, which may make you more likely to have a disability. So all of these identities really align with the idea of intersectionality. In terms of how we are trying to address it and design interventions that are going to be, to resonate and be responsive to all of that. We had a project, I do parent advocacy training interventions, and we had adapted a parent advocacy training for Latino families of kids with autism. And we had multiple agencies and community partners that all served Latino families, that all of the people who were in charge of those agencies were Latina moms of kids with autism, work with us, not just from when we received the grant and started it, but from conceiving what is this grant going to look like, and how are we going to get a research grant in a way that's really responsive, that will be able to recruit these families, that will be able to offer an intervention in a really meaningful way. I mean, they were with us and when I say us, I mean me, right? Me and them. We were together in the beginning drafting this grant, figuring out the budget and making sure that we were meaningfully including and paying people for their expertise that they had, and then kind of figuring out, okay, what will work and what won't work. And what I might typically do, and it was a randomized control trial, which now I feel like is a dirty word today, but it was a randomized control trial, and thinking about how are we going to incentivize people to do this, what questions can we ask that are okay to ask, or what are not responsive questions to be asking, right? And especially in the current political climate, how are we recruiting some of these families in a way that's meaningful but also very safe and responsive? So that's kind of how we're trying to be thinking about it.
I'd like to respond to that as well, actually, from the Bureau's perspective. So I actually, my background is in computational astrophysics, and I moved to the College of Education particularly to be in a college where this was important and this grounded the things that we're doing. And I think that this is one of the things that we try to do in the Bureau, but actually could do more of, because we have the Bureau of Educational Research, we can bring this into all of the projects. We have a pathway, and also to make it what we're actually trying to do. I could imagine a large centre kind of proposal that would be fundamentally around intersectionality, that would say, what is the, how do we address that in different sectors? Because I do think it's a topic that's important across the campus. I don't think everyone always has the language to talk about it. I don't think I've had the word intersectionality used outside of here when I'm in the north part of the campus. But it's not that they don't have those issues and recognise them. But I think people really want to have help on what do they do about it, like how do we address it. And so I think it could be something that, this is what is exciting about being here, is that we have the ability to make that a part of everything that we do and all of the research that we do. And I think that's one of the things, like thinking about today and the future, is what are the mechanisms to do that? as we build teams, we want to go after these grand challenge projects. They should all be based on this issue of social justice, and these ideas should be foundational to the things. I was want to give a quick shout out to Emily Stone, who's at the front here. She's in the Bureau. She's working at the intersection of education and health, and particularly around health disparities. And so she's out working with, talking with people in the community. She's been talking to a lot of people in the college, trying to understand what are the programs and the research opportunities that we can go after, particularly at the around the health area that touches on this. So.
Can I say something?
Yes.
Again? Sorry.
I was going to say that the question that was asked, sorry I didn't pick up your name,
Shalana Martin.
it is really our agenda. It should be our agenda. It shouldn't be a question.
Right.
And you know, the digital is the master's house, right? It isn't. A lot of people think that the digital, and we talk about it as access, as personalizing individual agency, all that kind of stuff. But in fact, when you see the practices that go on there, they get subsumed through, the monetizing of them, through the sexism of them, through the racism of them, through the patriarchal. And so it's our job, just as it was our job in regular classes, where we haven't well succeeded in being that in our normal, everyday, face-to-face curriculum. It's going to be harder if we're not conscious that the affordances of the digital are tremendous, but they could just reproduce the same. And only through working with the humanities, in a disciplinary way, will we be able to address the justice issues and the potential of the digital to expand access, to expand agency. So we should take that question and turn it into a goal.
Fantastic question. So I would like to ask a question now. I think I went before there's another question from the audience. So my question is around thinking about infrastructure that supports research. And as I just mentioned, I come from astrophysics. So in astronomy, we collaborate around telescopes which can cost $1 billion. Computational scientists are working with supercomputers, and we were just talking earlier this morning about how does the College of Education get access to supercomputers. These are exascale computers, they cost $1 billion. Ocean scientists are using custom-built experimental ships, robotic submarines, putting sensors out across the oceans. And this infrastructure doesn't just support the research, it helps to define a community and support a community and define grand challenge problems. So my question to you is, what do you see as the research infrastructure that we need to put in place to support modern educational research and define our community, whether that's probably not ships, but people and facilities that are going to support the research as we move forward in education?
Yeah, I mean this is a good question, and I mean I think we have credibility here at Illinois to be able to not only to speculate what would be good, but to even brag a little bit, right? Because what Fuad describing earlier, others describing earlier, that we've built some of these infrastructure tools that we think can allow the researchers who are here and future researchers to come to do powerful things. So the Ideal Lab being, I think, the best and most obvious example of that. We built that lab not as a tool for one faculty member to do precisely the research that they want to do, which frankly is what happens in a lot of universities when they go out and get a new associate professor. They build them a lab so that they can do exactly what that they've been dreaming of doing since they were a grad student. But here we built something that was meant to be used by people across this college and even people across this campus. And I think are there improvements that need to be made? Yes, to the people who control the budget for that thing, and in fact there are. But it's a really good place to start, and I think what's most important about the ideal space is that I think what it's done is it's reframed sort of how we look at research tools. That it's not something that can be used to answer a specific, just single question in education, but it can be used, to just collect data on all sorts of things, any sort of activity that could happen inside of the space. So, I would like to see more of those. I would like to see more examples of things that maybe don't deal with technology per se, but maybe tools that are good for just studying language learning, broadly speaking. I don't know what that would look like exactly, but thinking about those tools that can become centerpieces for an educational research machine here at the university. I know you would love for somebody to talk about the idea of like a classroom and because or a school and so I'll talk about it a little bit because I'm involved in some of those conversations and I think we should think about this. So the idea is can we in not in the best sense of this phrasing, take over a school, and can we instrument it in such a way that we can not only try out new designs, new ways, new kinds of pedagogy, and then collect lots and lots of data about what's happening there. I mean, there are obviously tons of concerns and discussions that would have to happen to do that. But I would agree that that's something that we should be thinking about. Can we really put ourselves into the community in a meaningful and impactful way while still doing the kinds of research that we want to do?
I agree with all that. To add to it, something that I've been thinking about is research centers. The idea to really promote and facilitate interdisciplinary research is to have a center where you're able to communicate with each other and have those cross-discipline dialogues and really trying to develop something that's outside of the box. There's lots of disability centers out there that are federally funded by a variety of different agencies. We have none of those here at the university. And it does seem like a campus initiative, but we would want something like that housed in the College of Ed, where we have the Department of Special Ed that's been known for decades for doing innovative, important, needed research in special education. But we do have colleagues in different departments who could be a part of something like that. And I don't think it has to necessarily just be something disability related either, but you could look at disability and technology. There's centers that are doing just disability and technology, and we have some of the best faculty that do each of those different things, and to be able to have the infrastructure of a center, I think would be really critical in moving forward.
Some of the white paper needs to be written.
There is what's called a Kirk Center. It's just somewhere in the archives.
I'm going to just push back just a little bit with friendliness to my colleagues, and it's a spirit of collaboration that I wrestle with, because I don't know if it's the stuff we need, the centers, the labs, as much as things like this culture around relationships that build communities to allow these things to be innovative. I mean, I heard my colleague say earlier, blocks of time. Good gracious. I mean, talk about building research infrastructure and having folk have blocks of time to do that. Policies and practices that support these things. I heard as well the colleagues earlier speak about protecting colleagues so that they have the time and space and to do the thing. I mean, this was, without going into too much detail about our executive committee in the Department of Educational Psychology yesterday, one of the major conversations we had was just about that. How do we protect our junior faculty members' time to build the kinds of infrastructure that they need? We just assume that they have the skill sets. They come to a research one like Illinois, top 10 across a variety of indices, programs. We just assume that we know how to attract those people to do that. But we're a different place. And so, this is not to say that we don't need funding, right? We need the funding, the innovative opportunities, the provost office is providing, the chancellor's office is providing, dean's office is providing here and there, president's office. We need all that, right? That's definitely in the wish list of research infrastructure. But there's some other intangibles that I wonder whether we talk about openly as well. Or another one on our plate that is getting, if it wasn't half the time talking about providing enough time for our junior faculties to have time to build their portfolio, the other part was a I hope I can say this out loud, but there are a set of policies that are on our tables that we're thinking about right now that just came out of our executive committee in the college that have us thinking about, wait, is this supporting our research time and infrastructure, or is this challenging our ability to have such? So those kind of conversations are the real conversations when it gets down to it. I mean, I can dream all I want to about research infrastructure and get multiple grants, but is it the kind of space where I think I can play in, where people can plan and we can grow? How about students? We haven't even talked about our building legacies of research students like Shalana and others who are in doctoral and postdoctoral programs. We need that too. So I think, it's complicated, it's a lot. The wish list is growing, and so maybe Luke, you have some more things to add.
I think that was the nicest pushback I've ever experienced. It felt more like a hug.
We're colleagues, bro.
I'm not sure exactly how to follow this, other than saying if you do manage to find those blocks of times, I would gladly take them. I don't feel like I'm really in a position to talk more about those infrastructure the same way that Rodney was talking about them. If I can go back and narrow it down to research infrastructure, although I completely agree with everything you said, but I feel like that's the part that I can talk a little bit more. In terms of my work in data science and education, some of the things that we see is that, a lot of people are thinking about how do we, and going back to my comment earlier about how do we go beyond just our small work that we're doing in a very specific context. A lot of people are thinking about how can we scale up to make sure that the data that we have can be generalized or can allow us to answer questions that are broader, that are more inclusive and things like that. But one of the issues that we have is that when you say educational data, it can mean almost everything. So it's really difficult to say what does an educational data infrastructure looks like. So there's some people that have done it kind of more specifically in terms of collecting, aggregating data of students participating in different online courses, MOOC courses. But the data that's being collected is mostly clickstream data. There's a lot of things you can do with clickstream data, but there's a lot of things you can't do with clickstream data. So is that enough? Is that actually going to allow us to answer those deep questions about how people learn in online courses? Probably not. So you'll be able to run a lot of analysis, you'll get paper out of it, but is it going to have an impact on how people learn in online courses? That's not quite clear, and probably, I would lean probably more towards no. I have a student who's interested in institutional data and how there's a lot of data being collected on campus, but they're kind of in different silos. And then, so everyone is using data for their own purposes, but would there be any benefits to being able to cross those gaps? And kind of, if you look at the data that's being collected on aggregate, does that tell us something that would be beyond what you can get from just those individual data sources? And so one example is we briefly work with people at the Office of Undergraduate Research. So they're interested in kind of linking their data that they were collecting, surveys on how people participate in undergraduate research, because they want to know, is that going to have an impact in the long term? We don't want to just know what they're doing. We want to be able to say, after they graduated, what did they do? And then, is the experience of doing undergraduate research, does that impact what people do once they leave the university? But it's a complicated issue. It's a very complicated issue because you want to respect the privacy of the students, And so if you put all the data together, that becomes dangerous. You don't want to give any data to anyone. All the data is collected for specific purposes. You might not be able to use it in a different purpose. And so there's all those issues that we need to navigate. So even creating an infrastructure just for our own campus is a challenge. So how do we go and beyond that? It's a very interesting question that I will not answer today.
Let's just respond briefly to Rodney's point, because I think that time is part of our infrastructure. I would include that as part of what's in scope. And I think we could learn from how the kinds of things that other disciplines are doing that we're not yet doing in education. We have a lot of high-level research centres on the campus that report to the BCR. I don't think any of them really fundamentally serve education. And these typically have staff and resources that can really help to get research programs going and support that. That makes hiring and career paths and so on much easier. There are things like in mathematics or theoretical physics, there's the Carverley Institute of Theoretical Physics, funded by the NSF, which funds faculty to spend months at a retreats to brainstorm the cutting edge topics in the field. Maybe that's something that would be relevant. So I think there are, I at the moment am funded by a physics grant, which is a year-long thing with 10 other sites. Fund some of my time just to conceptualize what an institute in multi-messenger astrophysics would look like. So that funds, if there are grants that would fund you to think about these questions and free up your time to do that. And so I think if we can think of these sort of big ideas, we could do more. There is there are multiple grants from the National Science Foundation that fund conceptualization. If you go after a major research infrastructure, well, this is something that's more complicated, but these things like the telescopes, there are many years of conceptualization that starts of buying out people's time to think about the infrastructure. So I think that these things can be put together, and people's time should be part of the picture, and I think it could be.
I keep thinking about your question. You're an assistant professor. So maybe, and this is a partial answer, maybe we need to move from just thinking about infrastructure to this notion of structure. So, you're not at the table, you're at the menu. Well, it's a much more difficult question because we never think of certain population needs. So, Megan, at least you're consulting with people that you're going to do things to, right? So the next step is, how could the Bureau, how could this college sort of say, who are the researchers from the various voices, minority populations, marginalized, be at the table? How can families, kids, community advocates be at the table? And when I say that, it's just not an invitation to come and share your ideas and walk away. How could they be part of conceptualization, of administering, of working with these projects that we have so that they have a permanent presence? And that too requires lots of time. That requires compensation. Why would a single mother who barely has access to fresh food be able to join an online Zoom so that's the kind of structure and infrastructure. By virtue of the other flip side of it is, how do we reward this? You always brag about, I brought my friend who was like president of ARI to give a talk. How could we brag, meaning reward, as part of our system? I was able to get that young child with this ability to actually have continuous voice in this whole endeavor that I'm calling an intervention, right? So, and that requires resources, that requires us to sort of think, what is reward in what, quote unquote, goes towards tenure, recognition, whatever you want to call it. So structures and infrastructure should go together if we're going to make a dent. And this is just a partial answer. But have people be part of running this thing, I think, would be important.
So I want to respond to that, otherwise it's more of a comment. So.
Okay, cool, thanks. I was going to respond to Rodney's opening statement, or at the end there, about the potential of a bureau to die. It made me think of Seal in his song where he said, if we're ever going to survive, we're never going to survive unless we get a little crazy. Anyone hear the song? Yeah. So I love the metaphor of that. And so I want to mention that when I was considering coming here, it occurred to me that this is a place where ideas were welcome. crazy ideas were embraced. Interdisciplinary teams were embraced. I have interacted with the Bureau a lot, submitting a lot of unfunded proposals and thankfully some funded proposals. I've never been told no. I've always been told, yes, we can do that. Yes, we can get that through. We have time. So I wanted to thank the Bureau for that, establishing this sort of environment. So as I think about other colleges and universities around that I admire, I think about Carnegie Mellon, their openness to crazy ideas, MIT, USC, where I was before this. I wanted to reflect on our own portfolio here. Are we crazy enough? Are we pushing limits? Are we trying things that might fail? Are we okay with risk? I know Rob's got the crazy box checked, but I am curious about what everybody thinks if we are crazy enough.
That's good. Very good point. So crazy.
I don't have any seal lyrics or crazy, but I love your comment, Chad. Thank you so much for bringing that out as well. And it does relate to the previous question from our previous dean, correct? Yes.
He was associate dean.
Associate dean.
He's a dean now.
A dean. I'm still learning my lineage, my Illinois lineage, so please bear with me. But I'm going to go back to, I think, Chair, you're helping me think through this because I came with a certain vigor as well from previous places. But I also know that those previous places I've struggled with, back to the notion of relationships, between the relationship that the university would play with its local community. I don't know enough about the north end of Champaign and our relationship, but all I got the first 3 to 6 months here interacting with colleagues in the Bureau and other colleagues is we have not had good relationships with our communities. Right? Like, what is that? Like, but I get it, again, from my previous places, again, Pittsburgh, Charlottesville, East Baltimore, Hopkins. I mean, Hopkins it's an excellent case of a community relationship that went haywire in the medical area. And IRBs would therefore be transformed forever as a result of those relationships between Hopkins and the East Baltimore and their communities. So yeah, I've been around some places where those relationships were not just strained. And so I don't know that enough about us, but what I'm hearing is that we can do better as well. But I think our relationship extends, and this is where, it is the communities north of us in the immediate area, but it's on that train as well going up north, in that bigger city up there that I don't think we plan relatively well in as well. So I just think that there's some opportunities that we still need to have, and bringing these issues out I think are important for us.
Well, I'll keep this quick, but I just want to, and I think this has been alluded to, but I think a particular community that we really need to focus on. You mentioned parents, but I think we need to think about teachers and our relationship with teachers. I unfortunately I've had interactions with people in the local school district here who were graduates of our program, who are fairly, skeptical and fearful in some cases of getting too involved in some of our research efforts. And I think a lot of progress has been made on that. I think in the last couple of years, but I think we need to keep pushing that. I mean, if I'm going to be able to go into and spend time in a classroom and work with the students, I need to be able to show my value to that ecosystem, to that environment. And so the Bureau recognized that a couple of years ago by hiring, Raya to partially fulfill that capacity. But I think, there's more work to be done to make sure that is, not only just, making sure that the letters get written and that the paperwork gets signed, but also that there's truly an understanding of what the partnership between these two groups entail. And this is what I'm going to be able to offer to you. This is what you're going to be able to offer to me. And I also want to say that also that extends, I think, not just to teachers, but also to the other educational practitioners that we have in our community. We've got museums in our community. We've got museums in other places, and I think these are also partners. After school organizations, those things. We need to develop relationships with all those groups, because that's where hopefully the fruits of our work is going to find its roots.
I just totally agree with that. I think that's part of the thing about infrastructure is these community relations are important for education research, and we have Raya was partially hired to do the full job, not the other way around. So and she's working with the schools. Emily is working with local community organisations. But this is something that we, it's important that this is infrastructure for us to manage the relationships that are important for research. I totally agree with you on that. Can we take another question from the audience? Barbara. Yes.
So I'm not certain if mine's really a question or more of a comment. And it sort of continues with what Floyd was saying as well as what Chad was saying about reconceptualizing what we're doing. And I'm coming at it from being a clinical teaching person, not a necessarily research teaching person, a research person. But we should be research teaching people. We shouldn't be separating these divisions. So Rob was just thinking about the teachers, but shouldn't we be thinking about the teachers within ourselves as well?
I agree with you.
So I have a question that relates directly to that, which is we've been talking specifically about the future of educational research, but I'm wondering if any of you could speak to how you think the future of educational research intersects with the future of teacher preparation, how it can be guided by our teacher prep needs and also impact our teacher prep needs.
Great question. Would you like to take that?
I'll take all the questions that they don't want to answer.
You would hope the two would coincide, right? You'd hope that your research informs how you teach and what you're teaching and how to do it better, and then vice versa. I can say for me, what I've focused on in my courses is sharing my research, but also really sharing the lived experiences of parents of kids with disabilities and individuals with disabilities themselves. So whether that's using videotaped testimonials that we have from grants and sharing them with the students and walking through what parents have said, escalating all the way up to running mock IEP meetings when parent advocates come in and really train the students firsthand about how do you work with families, what does this look like, what can you be doing right, and really trying to infuse that. And I'm really proud because when the students finish that class, they talk about their role as eventual teachers, and they think one of the biggest parts of their roles is going to be advocates because they're looking at parents and the parents are training them. So I'm trying to dovetail it as much as possible and being constantly thinking, how am I building on my research and future research grants, but also how am I using my research to inform my teaching, and thinking what are the problems that my students are having, their practicum and their student teaching placements, and how can I use that to inform kind of the research that we're doing.
Yeah, it's back to the question about rewards again. I think that that a colleague brought to our attention, and I think we have to keep that at the center of this conversation with our last two colleagues. Like, what are we rewarding? And at a place that prides itself on research, innovation, and advancement, and our own rankings, it's no surprise that teaching is not as valued. It's not as right. So I can go out and maybe say these things because maybe my colleagues see it but don't want to say it, or we see it. But the teaching beacon on that tripod is it's flimsy in a place like this. It might not be flimsy at some of our teaching institutions, but it might be a little flimsy here. Or maybe my lens in terms of how I see it. But I do know there's some, and we're not in teacher prep programs per se. So there may be some more people in the audience that have some experiences to answer these kinds of questions more specifically, as well, just to punt for us. But I do think that part of, we think about the issues of rewards is an important one, and what we value, and I don't know whether that opportunity to really engage at a teaching prep level is going to get as many points, and that's sort of the place we're in. Unless we make it, unless we find a way to build on the scholarship of teaching, like our colleague spoke earlier with regards to Lee Shulman and that work in Carnegie, and really figuring out how do we partner with those outfits in ways that really do support agendas and research around teaching that we have had. Otherwise, only thinking about the teaching piece. But then the other push, and another thing that we probably want to be aware of is the overuse, the increasing use without appropriate support of our clinical faculty, right? So being asked to do more teaching but with less support. So we have some roads that we're, I mean, this is convergent research, but it's also revealing some of the challenges as well that we are facing and don't sometimes have equipment to deal with, and no rewards to also support.
So, Chad, you shocked me when you said the death of the Bureau. I was like, no.
Rodney said it.
Repeating that is awful. So,
It's not ended. That's just a rumor that Chad's putting up.
but I don't want to end it, but clone people in the Bureau. I want to clone Beth. I want to clone Raya. I want to clone Gabrielle. So can I ask, because many of you have been in other institutions, what are the characteristics of the staff of the Bureau that really support us when we are going there with something that sounds like a crazy idea, and they don't tell us it's not crazy, it has possibilities, so that we can continue to make the argument that we cannot do this work without all this staff that is so wonderful and their expertise. So what is in the wish list, or how do we clone other people who are there?
Just bring the microphone, talking about wonderful people. I want to introduce Kim Darnell, who's just joined the Bureau, and so Kim is joining Tasha as one of the main people on pre-award, so you'll all be getting to know her very well. And then, who wants to take this question on how wonderful the Bureau staff are?
It's super wonderful. First I wanted to point out that I can't believe that the thing that most shocked you about what Chad said was not the seal lyric. Yes, the Bureau is wonderful, and I agree. If they could be threefold in terms of staff, what they are, I think we would all benefit from it. But they do a good job of using the people that they do have to get the job done. My wish list isn't long, but to refer to something that I I referred to earlier, I think one thing that I lack a lot is just this sort of more global awareness of all, the interesting, important things. And it's really been, again, just kind of through happenstance and random interactions that I often end up, discovering or finding out about things that turn into 3-year projects or even, rest of my life collaborations. And so I think, there's already some momentum behind this, but I think, to the extent that the Bureau can continue to do that sort of scoping the landscape for ways that the education can get involved in, initiatives that are happening on other parts of campus. I mean, one thing that's been really exciting to see, and this has been alluded to too, is just the degree to which education is more and more part of the conversation. I really have to attribute that to the leadership that we've had both in the Bureau and in the college generally, and just making us part of that. And I think to the extent that we can dedicate any more resources to helping make those connections with interdisciplinary partners within our own institution and even potentially outside of the institution, I think that would be tremendous. But yes, the Bureau is fantastic.
If I ask a question?
Yes, you may.
I want to ask you, we're talking about infrastructure, and there's some little pieces we haven't talked about. So I'm going to ask you what you think we could do with them. The Centre for Education in Small Urban Communities as a vehicle, perhaps. A CREA as another vehicle. UPS, and a couple of other little bits and pieces that Riley set up. They're all there on the margins, but potentially they might be the future. So what do you think we might do?
Someone want to take a quick 1-minute answer to that?
Yeah, that's how I would answer it.
You can be crazy.
I don't know if I'm the right person to answer, but I took that responsibility to take on these more difficult questions that maybe. And I think part of the, this is first of all, Gloriana, not a response so much as much to say that the Bureau has been, it's been my lifeblood. I've been here a year. And so I knew sort of where my bread was buttered, and I went straight there. And the Bureau has been tremendous at facilitating that. My question about, and this is, I'll go back to the Virginia case because I wouldn't want you all to think I'm talking about the Illinois case, but the Bureau didn't last at Virginia. And there were state politics, federal politics, local politics, some between faculty, some by virtue of the amount of research support that happens in bureaus that becomes interdisciplinary to catalyze. And all those are risky, particularly if there's not a steady support of funding coming through, let's just say. So it would be lovely if the Bureau, with the support of faculty, would continue to raise the questions that we're raising today for the rest of the year. Mm-hmm. And that you don't have just my children, godchildren and grandchildren coming back in 50 years, but that we have an opportunity to direct some of these and maybe continue these with forums and dialogues. That was an issue that came up in the college research committee that we had, and I know Chad and Gloriana, you were there. But how do we keep the conversations around the Bureau, its needs, our challenges on the table?
Thank you. We talked about the importance of doing things as a kind of community, college-wide effort instead of just individual faculty.
Gabrielle, you've been sitting here taking notes. Can we now ask you a question? Kind of like penny for your thoughts. Give us.
You've been good at taking all these notes, so can we put you right on the spot and sort of say, penny for your thoughts? I'm sure you don't have a well-formulated answer, but can you give us some of your thoughts, ideas about this very question, the future of the Bureau, its role?
Thank you. Well, I've learned a lot about the history of the Bureau. When I started, when Fuad talked to me a few years ago about this position, I had no idea what the Bureau was, and it took a while to understand. And then, really, if mention again that there's a history of the Bureau on the Celebration website that's just actually astounding what has happened. But I think it sort of comes back to the founding of the Bureau, in that it was driven by how to answer critical questions at that time around education and being able to do the start of research around that. And so I think now we're back at the stage where we have all of these important societal challenges that involve education. I mean, basically everything involves education. And we could play a real big role in aligning research to answer those questions. And as we've heard, making that part of teacher education and civic engagement. These are not separate things. They should all be part of the research environment. So I'd like to see the Bureau play a role in helping to facilitate understanding those questions, understanding how to bring teams together, being a part of facilitating teams to come together, really in the same way that happens across other disciplines in the sciences, and really what some of the interdisciplinary research centres on the campus do. They act as a focal point for big problems typically in science and engineering. And I think those questions are just as important in education. I think that we can address them, we can partner more with other units. I would like to see us coming up with the grand challenge question. I mean, it seems in education the problems are bigger than grand challenges, and we have to figure out how to simplify them into a grand challenge problem that we can address with multiple teams in the college, with multiple partners, and go after those things and understand how to have more impact with them. There's so many projects here, we're working on so many things, and how do we focus those activities to have the impact that we could have on modern challenges. I don't know if that answered the question well enough. There's a question at the back.
Hi, I'm not educational researcher per se. I study sociology, but one of the main issues in sociology is related to inequality in society. And as we know that education is one of the ways to limit the stratification in society, to create more education, more equal society. But the research shows that in the world, as well as in the US, I think in 2019, Colin has published a book about how high credentiality increased in the US resulted as the mass education's impact on decreasing educational equality. So what do you see the role of education in the future to decrease the inequalities in society, considering that there is high inflation in credentiality, high access to higher education, but then the graduates of the education is not having the same equal position in society, which is not in education, as I said, in the world. A trend today. Educational expenses is getting higher and higher, and certain schools are getting good degrees, but the others aren't. So what is the future of education do you see, and what's the role of education schools in that point? Thank you.
This is probably the last question before lunch, so a big question to end on. Who would like to take this?
I can try to answer. I think one of the things I want to say, and I'm going to put Rob and I on the spot here. I like Rob's comment earlier about how you kind of change the way you perceive some of those issues in terms of, I think it's easy for us to be, well, this is not what is relevant to our work, right? And it's something that I'm trying to keep in mind when I do my work, and I don't know that I'm succeeding, but when I look at the research that is being done, I have one paper that I'm working on that's looking at publication in my research community and whether not even address it, but even just pay attention to those issues. And you would be surprised at the amount of research that's being done that doesn't even consider equality at all. And so I try to keep that in mind. I still haven't figured out like how I kind of contribute to helping with this problem, but I'm hoping that I will be able to answer that question. And then I'll also go back to one of my comments earlier in terms of the teacher education program for computer science education. And this is something that I feel we really need to address while we're putting together that program and while we think about the future of computer science education in Illinois, but also across the states or beyond, in terms of making sure that we're trying to address issues of inequality. I mean, in that specific context, very kind of narrowed down to like access to computer science, because that's where I feel like I can contribute. but I think that's something we need to, like, personally, I need to pay attention to, and it is easy for me to not pay attention to it, if that makes sense. And so I try to remind myself that this is something that's important, and I hope people are going to call me out if I don't do it.
I think this is a really important question, and I think hopefully in the future of educational research, we're going to raise the bar, right? If it doesn't work for everyone, then it's not good enough. And it's not sufficient anymore to write research articles and say a limitation is that this only worked with the white kids, or my sample was all white, or the sample is highly affluent. Like, that is not enough. That should not be what the metric is to say that this is sufficient. We need to make sure we're testing and working with kids and we're making progress for all kids, and that we're addressing exactly what you said.
That's a fantastic question and a fantastic point to end on. I think it's something as well that we should take seriously in thinking, how do we make sure that this is promoted as the values of our research and the college and so on. We are running a little late, so I'm going to thank have us thank the panel.